For more than 100 years, the Ed Miniat Company has worked to build a strong reputation of honesty and integrity while producing quality products. Ever since Michael Miniat moved to Chicago from Lithuania in 1896, he began a business distributing fresh meat straight from the Union stockyards to a growing number of loyal customers. Those small businesses appreciated Miniat's efforts to use his horse and wagon to rush to them perishable merchandise.
And he'd put all of this stuff on a wagon, and he'd go peddle it. And he'd have barrels. And in those days, refrigeration was not the greatest, if any at all. And so it was paramount that when he'd leave the stockyards to go deliver, you'd have to do it real fast.
My great-grandfather pedaled from a wagon with horses. My grandfather then with trucks, and they developed a route of business throughout the Chicago, south side of Chicago, let's say, and the Chicago area suburbs.
By 1917, Michael's son Ed began working in the family business. This would be the beginning of a long line of Miniat family members who would join the company. And by the 1920s, horse and wagons were replaced by motorized trucks.
I think at one time, according to the pictures, he may have had 3 trucks, which was pretty good size at that time.
But it was almost 40 years later, in 1958, when Ed Miniat Sr., Ed Miniat Jr., and Ron Miniat formed Ed Miniat Incorporated, deciding that their growing business needed legal paperwork to protect the company name.
They talked that they wanted to get away from what they called the meat peddling business. They were operating off a dock at about 38th and Emerald Avenue in Chicago. They said they'd like to do something, and what would I suggest, and so forth. And I said, well, if you're seriously going into the business, you should incorporate. So they agreed, and a corporation was formed in June of 1958.
The Miniat owners worked just as hard as their employees. It was tough, back-breaking work, lifting sides of beef that weighed almost as much or more than they did.
But I used to go home the first week and sleep with my eyes open. Was so tired.
For the next 10 years, the meat industry began undergoing a huge change. The stockyards in Chicago started losing business when the cattle companies began moving west to where the herds were grown and fed.
The major packers moved out. What was once just an enormous industry in Chicago dried up. And then the only people that were left were little specialty players like us.
And instead of shipping millions of heads of cattle to the yards, the companies began slaughtering and breaking cattle in 20 states in the West.
I was lugging hindquarters. Starting at 12, I would be loading trucks, and then we were making, and we were producing boxed beef. I would be loading trucks with boxes.
Boxed beef, shipped all over the country, became the way of doing business. So in 1966, Miniat also made the transition from peddling meat to fabricating boxed beef.
When I look back, I feel that the generations reinvented themselves. There's a sense of each generation, in each generation of leadership, has a sense of building their own business.
By 1972, Miniat bought the South Chicago Packing Company at 945 West 38th Street and entered the edible rendering business. Again, the company was adapting to change in the new facility.
And then started operating out of here, doing that same process of what they called breaking cattle. And that was just taking these big sides of beef and basically cutting them down to size and boxing that and selling that to retailers.
The history there was hired a gentleman named Gene Mattern. And Gene Mattern came over and really started with our fats and oils division. helping create our rendering division. And we sold, as you probably know, a lot of our material across the street to Interstate Foods. And they, in turn, took it and made McDonald's 97.3 blend out of that. So we sold just bulk material right across the street. We had a lot of fat laying around, so we decided to render it. Gene was brought on and did a good job for the company.
These were the good days, and the company continued expanding. So in 1978, South Chicago Packing Company started the refining process.
We are now the largest independent refiner of edible animal fat in the United States, which means we have to bring in a tremendous amount of crude fat. The rail cars are the primary vehicle for delivering these large amounts.
But the company had gone through another down cycle, coming off the years in the early 70s when President Nixon imposed a trade embargo. And now red meat was falling out of favor. So by the 1980s, Michael and David Miniat entered the business and began developing the Miniat cooking process. By 1996, the Miniat Company built a state-of-the-art cooked meat facility in South Holland, Illinois. This expansion took the company into another new direction.
The restaurant side didn't have as much of that because cooked meats in a restaurant were a little bit newer, and so we had to learn how to continue to be more proactive. We started investing in product development more, and then we invested in the culinary side more.
Sure enough, the company continued to grow and prosper. And in 2007, David Miniat was named chairman for the American Meat Institute for 2007 through 2008. And in 2009, Miniat opened the Culinary Center and new headquarters on the premises of the South Holland cooked meat plant. And today, the company is stronger than ever, with a growing customer base and continued family involvement.
We've always known our customers well, but to get to know the other parts, to get to know what the industry is, who our competitors are, who our suppliers are, and what's going on in that industry. And so we've made a lot of efforts that way, and I think it will have a lot of benefit for us in the future.
A future that will still challenge the Miniat family to be flexible and adaptable for change, all the while servicing customers as it has for over 100 years, standing for honesty, reliability, and the highest standards for excellence.
And my dad always reminded me of one that was humility. And I do believe this company is a humble company. It underpromises and overdelivers.